Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I rise to make my contribution to the bill before this Honorable House, the Cannabis Bill 2020. Mr. Speaker, there was a lot of grandstanding and platforming and public meeting happening previously as it spoke to the cannabis bill. And a lot was said, Mr. Speaker, but nothing much that dealt with the bill before this Honorable House. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am not certain if the honorable members pay attention to what Parliament is about and why we present bills before this Honorable House. I don't know if they pay attention to the bills that we passed in previous parliaments. Because if I'm not mistaken, back in July of 2019, we would have made some amendments to the Drugs Prevention and Abatement of the Misuse and Abuse of Drugs Amendment Bill 2019. And that came about based on the ruling in the courts with the case with Sankofa. And it was believed that in order for us to be able to come in line with what the court would have indicated, the changes would have been made. And I do recall that the Senator and Minister with responsibility of health, Junior Minister with responsibility of health, would have indicated at that point, and if I'm not mistaken, Senator, that having passed and made the amendments to the Drug Prevention and Abatement of the Misuse and Abuse of Drugs Amendment Bill 2019, it meant that some of the changes that would have been required or some of the recommendations of the court in order for us to be able to meet the specifics in terms of the Rastafarian community and their use would have been addressed there. And so that means that bill which was being referred to, the Cannabis Bill, which was in May of 2019, months before the court hearing, would have therefore had to be relooked as well, which is what this government have done. Also, Mr. Speaker, we must indicate that I do recall that in the presentations on our side before me, the honorable members, the mover and the seconder, would have indicated that it is a start, Mr. Speaker, and that changes will be made as we see fit going forward. But for now, we must be prudent in the way in which we make laws in this country. And it can't just be about some knee-jerk response and policy response, but rather it must be thoroughly thought through and ensure that whatever legislation we come up with is in the best interest of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. And I will end there on that, Mr. Speaker, and present my case as to why this Cannabis Bill 2020 is something that is needed, yes, and something that this Team Unity administration will pursue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today we discuss reforms that are coming not only to our federation, but to the nation and around the world, Mr. Speaker. These are important changes that can make a positive impact on the lives of our people and the way that this argument in this House should be focused, Mr. Speaker. It is a way of ensuring that the quality of life is improved for those individuals who suffer from chronic pains, Mr. Speaker, through the use of medicinal cannabis, as well as opportunities that are created from this brand new cannabis industry and the jobs as well that will be created with this brand new industry, Mr. Speaker. We cannot lose focus on that.
True.
Fact, Mr. Speaker. As I said before, Mr. Speaker, this government doesn't create any knee-jerk policies. And we hear it all the time. We take too long to do this, we take too long to do that. But we all can agree that once this administration brings any legislation to this National Assembly, to this Parliament, it is well and thoroughly thought through, planned out, and is in the best interest of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. Because we understand that we must be prudent and thorough in how we move forward on matters, Mr. Speaker. And this one is no different, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, we would have heard from the Honourable Mover of the St. Kitts and Nevis National Commission on Cannabis, which was established to consult extensively on all the relevant issues. This commission dialogued with the people, listening to the views of a wide range of individuals in this country, so as to allow for differing perspectives and thus ensure that their recommendations were in line with the wider populace. Mr. Speaker, this cabinet considered and accepted more than a dozen of the broad recommendations put forward by the Commission. And they didn't stop there, Mr. Speaker. After having those recommendations put forward, this Team Unity administration then established a committee whose job it was to provide research and advice on how the recommendations outlined by the Commission can be used for the implementation of a proper cannabis industry here in St. Kitts and Nevis in a way that would ensure that the Federation and the people of the Federation are the beneficiaries of such an industry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and now we are here. We are here before this Honourable House at this crucial point, having taken the time to understand the pros and the cons, the best practices, and the more meaningful and practical ways to move forward with such an industry. Here we are today, Mr. Speaker, the Cannabis Bill 2020. And once these changes are approved, these reforms will be implemented in a properly regulated and managed way, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's good governance on display right there, Mr. Speaker.
You must have a regulated framework.
Mr. Speaker, over recent years around the world, more and more countries are now beginning the conversation and starting and taking advantage of the cannabis for its medicinal benefits, Mr. Speaker. There have been over 60 peer-reviewed studies into the benefits of cannabis in medicine, and that research continues. And from that research, one thing is clear, Mr. Speaker. It can improve the quality of life of the people with chronic pain, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure there are people who are listening, and even people who are seated in these chambers, who know of loved ones, or even they themselves, who suffer from chronic pain, Mr. Speaker. And now here is an opportunity through the properly regulated use of medicinal cannabis. And I think it's worth repeating based on what we heard just previously. Properly regulated use of medicinal cannabis, approved by medical professionals, then we can ease some of the pain that these people live with. That pain reduction can have a clear positive impact on people's lives, Mr. Speaker. And we hear it over and over from this Team Unity administration. People first. How can we do things that will make people's lives better, Mr. Speaker? And any regulation that we bring to this Honourable House looks at that first and foremost, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, those suffering from conditions such as multiple sclerosis, nerve pain, have found cannabis can ease their discomfort without resorting to opiates, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is the World Health Organization who say, and I quote, Uses of cannabinoids are being demonstrated by controlled studies, including treatment of asthma, glaucoma, antidepressant, appetite stimulant, anticonvulsant, and antispasmodic, Mr. Speaker. The benefits are clear when a survey of consumers who use cannabis for chronic or intractable pain found 95% saw an improvement in their medical conditions. Mr. Speaker, that therefore means that this bill isn't just the right thing to do. It's not about just passing a bill, Mr. Speaker, but it's also the compassionate thing to do, Mr. Speaker. In previous years around the world, the thought of using cannabis for medicinal use would have been met with harsh criticism, Mr. Speaker. But now even countries that may have had tough legislation and laws that spoke to the use of cannabis, such as China and Singapore, have now begun to look at cannabis research for medicinal purposes, Mr. Speaker. And so it's clear that sometimes you just have to broaden your mind, Mr. Speaker, and focus on what truly matters. And that's the point, Mr. Speaker, what it is that truly matters, Mr. Speaker. It matters, Mr. Speaker, when our friends and loved ones suffer from pain, Mr. Speaker, and having a medicinal cannabis industry that see to it that we are able to treat persons with these type of pains. Mr. Speaker, that is what I call serving the people, Mr. Speaker. That is what I call helping our communities, Mr. Speaker. That is what I call delivering for our federation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, though, there are clear medicinal benefits associated with cannabis, there are also significant economic opportunities, Mr. Speaker. And that is clear with the prospect of a new cannabis industry right here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Mr. Speaker, the world is currently just starting to wake up to the potential of the cannabis industry, and we too must be ready for it, Mr. Speaker. Little steps, but we will be ready. We cannot stand idly by and watch other countries get a head start on us, Mr. Speaker. We can't just wait until 5 or 10 years later, 10 years from now, and say, we wish that we did, or we wish that we should have, or we should have taken that bold step, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the good thing is that with this legislation, we are saying we are ready to pursue this opportunity. And this Team Unity government, which have already delivered jobs, which we heard our Honorable Prime Minister speak of earlier today, created new opportunities, will continue to do so within this cannabis industry. The prospect of a new industry here in St. Kitts and Nevis that can provide valuable exports to international markets is understandably attractive, Mr. Speaker. This Team Unity government knows the importance of looking for new areas that can develop opportunities for our people. And we see that opportunity present itself with cannabis. We've heard about the amount of money that is projected to be in this industry by 2025. And 2025, Mr. Speaker, is only 5 years from now. Cannabis has been approved for medicinal purposes of some form from a wide variety of countries all over the world, Mr. Speaker. It has been approved in places like Brazil, Germany, Spain, Canada, South Korea, Argentina, and the United Kingdom. And closer to home in the Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica have been leading the way so far by hosting the Canex Jamaica Business Conference and Expo, which brought together industry experts from around the world, Mr. Speaker, focused on medicinal cannabis. We also see moves towards cannabis use in medicine as a potential industry in places like Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago, Dominica, and Grenada. So the direction of travel worldwide is clear, Mr. Speaker. It is also evident that this will be a highly competitive industry. For St. Kitts and Nevis to succeed in this industry, we need a government who can support the sector. Mr. Speaker, we can't return to the past. We can't return to the same old Labour with their high debt policies and economic mismanagement, which means there won't be any support for a new cannabis industry under them, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, even local and foreign investors understand and are also hesitant because they know the mismanagement of this country's finance under that previous administration, and they too can't even trust them with any new industry within St. Kitts and Nevis, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I close, St. Kitts and Nevis is taking the steps forward, poised to reap the benefits on two fronts. First, by being able to deliver much-needed relief to those living with chronic pain, and in so doing, dramatically improve the quality of life for those suffering with chronic conditions, Mr. Speaker. And secondly, the opportunity for St. Kitts and Nevis to be at the forefront of a new global industry, a new industry that could see new jobs and opportunities for our people, Mr. Speaker. We will not sit idly by and ignore the opportunity that presents itself, Mr. Speaker. And yes, maybe most of this bill speaks specifically to medicinal cannabis, but that's the reason why, because we see the opportunity for the Federation as a whole, for the people as a whole, in having this piece of legislation move forward, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will not discard the pain relief for our friends and loved ones, so we have to push this forward, Mr. Speaker. Though these measures are a step in the right direction, we still have to do more. And we understand that we still have to do more, Mr. Speaker. But first and foremost, we must be prudent in what we bring to this Honourable House and present to the people of this Federation. They have asked us to be prudent and lead and be able to make decisions for them that would affect them positively. And that is what we will continue to do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must do this properly and in a way that combines effective regulatory oversight and good governance, what this government is known for, Mr. Speaker. But whether you are someone suffering daily in need of some relief, or you are a young person looking for a sector to make your future career in, you can both look forward to a brighter future with optimism. Mr. Speaker, this Team Unity government hope to keep St. Kitts and Nevis on the right direction to ensure that optimism is fulfilled and you see a better future, Mr. Speaker. And with those few words, Mr. Speaker, may it please you.